The headline is Chinese propaganda now citing U.S. journalists and Democrats' coronavirus rhetoric. Comes from the Washington Examiner. Hi, I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations. I'm going to show you something called a circular loop that makes false information look real. And it's not something you want to do, but it's something you want to be aware of. So this is a hypothetical example supported by various sources. However, I'm not saying that this is actually what's happening, but it could be, and you can do your homework to find out. Imagine an organization shares propaganda like we have the best automobiles in all of the world, and our customers like our automobiles more than any other automobile. Well, first off, you probably recognize that if your customers like the automobiles more than anything else, someone who has bought an automobile, who's been asked if they like the automobile, is more likely to say yes, they like it, because it reinforces the decision to purchase. And why else would you buy a vehicle other than you liked it? Because why would you buy a vehicle you didn't like? So we're starting off right there to know that the information is false. However, if your company does a press release and then it's picked up by various news publications saying your brand of automobiles is most liked by consumers, and then cites a few reasons why, you can then as a company refer not to your original claim, but the claim of the credible publication. And that will reinforce your original message that your automobiles are more important than others. In fact, this is what's called public relations. Edward Bernays talks about this in his book Propaganda, and it's also talked about as part of public relations, where you share one message quietly to reporters, and then when the reporters cover your message, you amplify their coverage of that message in order to reinforce the original message. Now, you can even go as far as using the news media as a channel to carry advertising, which then they read the credible news coverage of your message as well as see your advertising of the message, and this will boost the value of your advertising message. So the headline, Chinese propaganda is now cited by U.S. journalists and Democrat coronavirus. So the Chinese are quoting the rhetoric provided by the Democrats as evidence that their original message is good without connecting back to their original message. So we have a chain of communications here. There were claims that the Democrats were repeating Chinese propaganda. I just saw a video where they were talking about jailing individuals to quarantine them. Of course, that is counter to releasing people from jail because of the coronavirus, but we're not going to talk about that. And then we saw that same behavior in China, and as part of their red and golden lettered banners that were also photographs of them were shared with quotes such as stay inside for the sake of your relatives, or a day in the sunshine is not worth a lifetime underground, which was basically what we hear today in the U.S. news is that it's not worth going out and spending a day on the beach if it means the death of your community or your own death. Well, as that message percolates, people have maybe a 7-day memory when it comes to a lot of the stuff. Most people, it's a lot shorter. But if China comes back along and then uses the relevant rhetoric that supports their overall interest, now they can say, look, this isn't what we're saying. This is what the Democrats in the United States are saying, or this is what this credible expert in the United States is saying. And now the original message, whether true or false, is now reinforced by this loop of communications. So how do we use this in business to keep ourselves from believing things that aren't true? So, for example, if you have a marketing campaign and it's passed around the business for months at a time, very often, by the time it gets to a final decision maker, they're likely tired of hearing about it, and it's old news to them. Now, mind you, a client may have never seen this advertisement, or a customer or somebody in the marketplace may have never seen this advertisement, but everybody involved has seen it so many times that it is now passé. It's now tiring. And so it's not going to have the same enthusiasm. It's not going to get pushed along, and then you'll find folks that want to tweak it a little bit. You might have a rumor in your organization that gets passed around long enough that folks believe it's true. So the economy's a little tight. The rumor is that folks are going to get laid off soon. Everybody starts talking about the layoffs. Next thing you know, an executive will come on to address the issue, and they say, I know everybody's talking about these layoffs. We don't have any information right now on whether that's going to happen or not going to happen, because they can't confirm or deny it. Because if they confirm the layoffs, everybody's more scared and they don't do any work. If they deny the layoffs, then some people will suspect it's true, and then they can't lay off people if they actually have to. The company might have to actually lay people off. And ultimately, the conversation ongoing about the false information makes it seem more credible because now you're hearing it from multiple sources. So what we do is we trace information. So there's an idea or concept. Let's say, for example, that stay-at-home orders are more effective at addressing COVID-19. The claim is that a stay-at-home order will so-called flatten the curve of infections. Well, where did this information come from? Can we trace it back to a credible source? Not many credible sources, not multiple news medias that report on the topic, but what is the credible source? Well, the credible source is the CDC. In the beginning of the crisis, staying at home is a means. I don't even want to say at the beginning of the crisis, though. This crisis is made by bad decisions. But in the beginning of finding out that there's a flu strain, staying at home if you're sick is the best solution to reduce the spread. So it's identify the symptoms, stay at home if you're sick, prepare for a long-term event. That's what came out of the CDC early. To wear a mask or not to wear a mask, that came out of the CDC. There's credible information out of the CDC on their website. Very boring stuff. If you read it, it's very boring. Wash your hands with soap and water, best solution. Then you have a layer on top of that of the interpretation of what was on the CDC by both the public and by news media. Now remember, the purpose of news media is to sell advertising. They have to keep you tied to the television long enough, or the news stream or the social media stream long enough for you to see the advertisements. Otherwise, they can't afford to pay those reporters all that money to be up there as reporting celebrities. Ultimately, if you hear the message now, should we stay at home or should we not stay at home? See, the news wants to cover both sides of it to be so-called fair and accurate. We now start bringing in other options. Now, notice you didn't hear very much about the states who have not set strict stay-at-home orders. Many states, many countries have not done stay-at-home orders. They made the primary suggestion that we had from our CDC, which is if you're sick, stay at home for 14 days. That's the incubation period. Stay at home for 14 days. Be aware of who you're interacting with. Social distance from people if you're sick. The if you're sick part falls off. There becomes an ongoing discussion of whether people should stay at home or not stay at home. There becomes governors who chime in, and then they chime in with their own political opinions. So, we're going to hide, Maryland governor is going to hide the medical equipment so that the federal government doesn't take it. Now, what does that have to do with the problems that were set up earlier where medical equipment wasn't available? What does that have to do with the fact that much of this medical equipment is not in use? Because how can you hide something that is regularly in use? You would think you'd want to spread the materials out over the hospitals so that the federal government doesn't come and take it. Ultimately, though, the original message gets conveyed with each filter through each layer, and until you trace back to where the original information came from and question whether it's a credible source or not, you won't know that somebody has injected information in the conversation. China was welding doors shut and leaving people for dead. This is a known fact. We know as a fact with the Five Eyes reports that China had advanced knowledge of the spread of a virus of some kind, and that they had requested globally for people to send PPE to the country, which contributed to the lack of PPE in the supply chain. Now, you could have known this earlier if you had credible sources. For example, if you know Chinese nationals, they would tell you there's a problem in Wuhan. They knew this in December and January. In fact, during the Chinese cultural Lunar New Year celebration, there were cities that were off limits. Ultimately, this kind of feedback creates loops that makes false information seem true. Very often, you can inject information into a conversation stream or around a concept that is slightly altered, and then later pick it up again when the slightly altered version is common discussion. Altogether, you need to prepare to trace out this information before you make a decision. Because if it's the example that my automobile is the best, and you've put this in the marketplace and then quoted news coverage of your automobile being the best, that may not be the best solution. So if you're on the receiving end of that, you don't want to make a bad buying decision. If you hear concerns about farmers tilling under crops and you are in the food services business and you suspect a major change in pricing or a limitation in distribution or availability, you need to adjust accordingly on that as well. And ultimately, by digging down to the primary source, you'll be able to get additional information. Like, for example, masks are not effective at keeping people from getting coronavirus because they actually circulate your own breathing air. And then actual N95 masks that are effective contain other factors that help reduce or kill that particular virus. It's more of a make you feel good type of thing. Ultimately, I'm not positioning one side or another around the COVID-19 issue. I'm just using it as a relevant example to show you that information can be manipulated. Information can be filtered as it moves through different levels. You can go from 100% truth based on a specific set of research, and it starts to going 80% truth, 60% truth, and all the way down to 0% truth and speculation. The article itself could be speculation based on a finite set of facts and points. It could be lazy work on the part of journalists where they translated press releases from China early in the COVID-19 issue and then use those, which later were changed or later were amended, and this news story never recovered from that. And it could be a deliberate activity to exchange propaganda using public relations to introduce an idea, have that idea get picked up by a marketplace, and then reinforce the idea using the third-party references of the original concept or idea, and even use it in a different way. I know this can get all confusing at times. I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations. If you are confused about this concept and you'd like to see a diagram, you can visit www.insidestrategicrelations.com and request the chains of communications diagrams. If you open a ticket, we'll send you a diagram that shows you the chain of communications where information is introduced into a marketplace. The marketplace discusses the information. You hear of the marketplace discussing the information, and then you repeat what the marketplace is saying as reinforcement for your original message. It's used every day in marketing. It's used heavily in politics. It's definitely used in propaganda. And it ultimately is a way to amplify information. However, it's not often the best way because you start getting into hearsay and myths and distractions from that original credible message. In fact, any statement made about the coronavirus is actually on a timeline based on the available information. Like, we know now that the stay-at-home orders are not as effective as people voluntarily staying at home based on their current physical condition. Like, for example, if elderly folks stay at home versus all go to the grocery store at the same time and concentrate the risk, they're more likely to stay healthy. Mental isolation, we know now, is not good for you. We knew that before, but we are now acknowledging that. And there's a whole factor of things that are difficult to understand without mapping it out. So again, if you contact my offices at www.insidestrategicrelations.com, just go to the contact page, send me a letter, send me a fax, open a help desk ticket, and I will be more than happy to diagram and show you how this works. Because if you're on the receiving end of this kind of conversation, you can very quickly determine the difference between propaganda, hearsay, and actual facts. And you can derive very valuable insights about the direction of activity, such as a supply chain example. And you can also use this information to make better decisions when you can reverse some of those filters. So again, I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations. I know it's a concept that is very complex and difficult to convey on a simple podcast, but I hope I've delivered to you something of value. Like and subscribe. Let me know. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening.